One of the things we need to be worried about, especially on the left, is that now the fact that the Conservatives have a majority to essentially do what they want, that's the worrying thing, is that the Conservatives can now do what they want. And very often, worryingly, this will be an assault on the progressiveness of the UK itself, its values, its institutions that help the poorest in our society. And here we go with one from Owen Jones. The Tories plan on an assault on a progressive Britain. The left must be prepared. And once again, we're talking about, look what's happened in Hungary. Look what's happened in Poland, where these really hard right parties have got into power with a majority and have started doing what they want. It's not been very good. Now, luckily, as we've discussed before, those parties have been somewhat tempered by being in the European Union, which is part of the function of the European Union, to preserve, good democratic institutions. The problem is, we are not going to be in that. And our constitution, literally protected by a gentleman's agreement of, okay, we promise not to do it, won't hold up if Boris Johnson decides that, well, I don't want to hold to that principle anymore. And then, who can hold Boris Johnson to account when he's no longer said that the judiciary can no longer hold him to account? And then you could be in for quite a long period of Tory rule, as I am incredibly worried about, not through popularity, but because they've rigged the system in their favour, winning pretty much every election before they've even started to campaign for it. For the Tory right, Brexit was not simply a means to reconfigure the UK's relationship with the European Union. It was, for millions of voters, but it was a blunt instrument to remodel society in its own image. This grand national project was rudely interrupted when Labour deprived the Conservatives of a majority in 2017. It will now be renewed with vigour, underpinning its both triumphalism and insecurity. Triumphalism because Labour has been subject to a devastating defeat, leaving it shattered and demoralised, stripped of seats it has held for decades, and because it has no plausible leader who can confidently presume to take the party to victory in 2024. Insecurity because support for Labour among younger voters, it is unprecedentedly high. I just got an itch in the back there. It is unprecedentedly high, while for the Tories it is an unparalleled low, because the right knows Labour's economic policies are popular, driving its 2017 surge and provoking the only doubts Tory strategists had about a victory this time around, and because it is keenly aware that the left-led Labour Party came horrifyingly close to forming a government just 2.5 years ago, falling short by just 2,227 votes in 7 constituencies. That near-death experience, as far as they are concerned, must never be repeated. The electoral map is already rigged in the favour of the Tories. It took on average just 380,000 votes to elect a Tory MP, compared to the 50,000 compared to a Labour MP. That advantage will now be entrenched. The Tories' planned redrawing of constituency boundaries would have handed them a majority of 104 if implemented in 2019, up from 80 seats as it stands, borrowing from the Republicans and the introduction of voter ID, a supposedly solution to the nearly non-existent problem of voter fraud. Will they hit the poor Labour-leaning voters the most? An authoritarian power grab beckons. On page 84 of their manifesto, the Tories commit to examining the broader aspects of our constitution, including the relationship between the government, parliament and the courts, as well as a, quote, update of the Human Rights Act and the administrative law. Expect assaults on perceived bastions of progressive Britain too. The Tories have pledged to ban all-out rail strikes, except a weakening of an already hobbled institutions. Now here's an actual answer to this, and it's a really good idea. I think you can still go on strike, rail unions, but you have to be clever about it, and you have to do what they do in Japan, because what they do in Japan would absolutely cripple the railway companies, and it would put you in a big position of power. What you do is this: when you go on strike, you don't stop working. What instead they do in Japan is that they keep on working, but they do not take fares. So what the rail unions must do is go on strike, but any gates that require ticket access to platforms must be opened. Conductors, while they must be on trains, mustn't take any fares. Instead, they must issue tickets but not take any money. If they do this like they do in Japan, it works incredibly well. And that, I think, is the way to get around this banning of strikes on public transport. You still operate the public transport, but it now costs them money to run the platforms and the stations. It is a good way to get around this idea of striking, and I think that transport unions should look to that as the future model for striking. So, as a Times Higher Education puts it, the conservative right would relish a full-on US-style culture war against universities over their supposed left-wing bias. Prepare then, too, for an offensive against the progressive thought in higher education. Popular culture will be another battleground. Boris Johnson's threat to abolish the BBC licence fee is an unapologetic attempt to coerce more favourable coverage, while menacing progressive central output. The Tories' threat to review the broadcasting charter of Channel 4 News and their boycott of BBC Radio 4's Today programme are indicative of the party's intolerant, even mild press scrutiny. Much of the press already behaves as the Tories' de facto campaign wing. New research revealed that a farcical disparity between positive election coverage of the government and the off-the-charts negative reporting of Labour. Expect the press to accelerate its cheerleading for the government while savaging its opponents. Whoever becomes the Labour leader will come under remorseless pressure from both within the party, the right-wing media, and the Tories to bury Corbynism. That will not just involve demands for purges, but the absolute abandonment of domestic policies and a pivotal rightwards on social issues. Nothing will be enough. As David Cameron discovered with the Tory Brexiteers, every concession will just make the critics fatter and hungrier. Johnson's refusal to apologise for his back catalogue of racism and homophobia leaves every bigot feeling that their hatred has the Prime Ministerial of approval. Accept the already cruel victimisation of minorities, ranging from Muslims to trans people, to accelerate. Even some on Labour's left talk privately of pivoting rightwards on social issues. They should tell us which minority they wish to throw under which bus. There used to be a distinction between the centre-right and the extremes beyond, summed up by Cameron's description of UKIP as fruitcakes, loonies, and closet racists, mostly. Not so for today. The far-right thug Tommy Robinson reportedly celebrated the Tory electoral win by claiming that he was joining the party. Britain First apparently urged by its supporters to then join to, quote, make Boris Johnson's leadership more secure. While racist provocateur Katie Hopkins boasted to someone that it's now our party, ours now. The far-right threat against minorities and the left wing will heighten. but the latter will be portrayed as a dangerous rabble. The acceptance of the narrative helps explain how, during the election, the alleged assault of two Labour canvassers in their 70s was largely ignored, while the supposed punching of a Tory advisor by a Labour activist, which never happened, attracted widespread publicity. All of this is bleak, yes, but it's better to be prepared than to be overwhelmed by the coming deluge. The transmutation left must unite to face the unprecedented adversary. In Hungary, the centre-right Frizid party radicalised when in office and went into an authoritarian right-wing extremist administration, and that has destroyed the substance of democracy while maintaining its presence. It is not inevitable the same will happen here, but it is entirely plausible. Progressives should buckle up, and brace for impact. And I agree. We need to be prepared and be prepared to fight back when it will inevitably happen. And I think it will come very quickly what will happen. And we need to protest. We need to make our voices heard loud and clear. And we desperately need a leader in Labour Party that we can all gather around. And that means that Momentum and other people in the party must be willing to make sacrifices. But that's not saying that we must give in to the centrist left or the Blairites, because they also will have to make concessions. They cannot deny that the policies that Labour put forward under Corbyn were unanimously popular. Corbynism is not dead. It is not dead and buried, as so many papers have said. It is only going to grow. Young people have been exposed to a leader who genuinely cares about the populace of this country. Compared to Boris Johnson, who flew off to the Bahamas for his Christmas vacation, and then Jeremy Corbyn, who went down to his local food bank with no press around him. We only know about it because the food bank itself told everyone on their social media that this had happened. That's the difference between the current leader we could have had to the one we've got now. And yeah, we've just got to get ready and prepare for it and prepare to fight back. And we have to fight back as one unified left. We cannot allow the Conservatives to get away with this. With anything that they do and anything that they must do, we must assure that we win in 2024. We have to. No ifs, no buts. And put it this way, even if we halve their majority to something really small, then that would also be a victory as well. But predominantly, we want to win. And that's the mindset we've got to go with. And we have to sort ourselves out and arrange ourselves out fast and quickly as possible. And that means all leftist factions should put aside any disagreements they have with anyone else on the left and work together to fight against the Tories. That is what our goals and aims should be. So, as I said in this video, transport unions do what they do in Japan. Operate the transport but refuse to take fares. That is an incredible way to not only strike but keep the public on your side as well. Imagine, imagine if we will, that the tube goes on strike. What happens? Every Londoner gets up in arms, and Londoners turn against London Underground. He's one of the most hated unions in London, But imagine this, if London Underground went on strike but still kept on operating, but refused to take fares and opened the gates so that everyone, regardless, could just go through, that would be an amazing way for them to go on strike and not only keep the public support, but keep public sympathy as well.